Hi, this is Judah, and this should be my third video on this channel. I'm going to be talking about a pretty bold claim, which is that all arguments for God are irrelevant. Now, hold on a second. I encourage you to watch this video with an open mind, right? That is the key word of this video, open mind. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever seen a Hermetic Christian that says that, oh, dude, the teleological argument, that was it for me, the cosmological argument, something along these lines, that was it for me? Typically not, right? You're typically Christian beliefs are typically rooted in other things, right? More spiritual, more external reasons for the faith, such as personal experience. Christians often say things like, I had such a crazy religious experience in the church, which, by the way, you can do research on this. Churches are manipulative to give you that religious experience. Um, they try their best to, kind of conduct a religious experience with things like, well, you could do your research on this. Um, but or they're like the Bible's pages were just popping off to me. They applied so well to my life, or the fundamentals of Christianity are good, which is, we both know this isn't really true. If you've done research on Christianity, Bible supports things like slavery, genocide, like atrocities like this. Um, However, that's what it comes from, And then I think that there's one big word to define all of this, and or to define kind of like group majority of belief in Christianity, and that's identity. Okay? I'll give you an example. Some kid is born into a Christian household. All of his friends are Christian. They go to church, they do rituals every week, they pray before dinner. The kid is just kind of identifying with Christ. And I think that that's some people will openly say, yes, Christ is my identity, right? A lot of people will argue against it. But identity is not just saying that I identify with Christ, or that's just what I identify as, like as a believer, right? Because you could say, well, I don't necessarily live my life, or that's not the reason for my faith. However, I want to argue that it is, because identity in my definition, or the way that I view it, is also shown by external means, such as following the fundamentals of Christianity, applying it to things like your marriage, applying it to things like your friends, applying it to challenges in your life. You're identifying with these Christian fundamentals, doing things like rituals, going to church every Sunday, doing tons of religious, spiritual, enforcing things. And that's what you get your faith from. It's not an argument from God, it's being a Christian, right? A good example of this is if you're here, right? And there's a box of arguments and you're over here, but there's still a gap from here to here, right? That gap can't be filled. It just can't, right? So these arguments are trying to justify your identity, okay? That's why they're irrelevant, because your identity is self-fulfilling. You're doing things that reinforce your identity, right? So arguments for God are more or less irrelevant. Now, this is a bold claim, but I'm sure that, or I would hope that that kind of convinced you that arguments for God just don't get you there. It's not possible. It's irrational to believe in God without acknowledging that you are taking a blind leap of faith and fulfilling your own religion with your actions. Um, yeah, I think that's about it for this video. Um, However, I do want to end this video with saying that I don't believe that anyone that believes in God or any religion is dumb. I think that there are things to consider, such as the truth value of each religion, with things like personal experience and self-fulfilling. Because if you look at things like a Muslim religion, for example, they have the personal experience that brings them to the God. They're born into the family, and they also self-fulfill with rituals and things like this. And if all three of these gave a religion truth value, then the religion would be true. And obviously, we know that all religions can't be true. And I do want to focus on this for actually a minute, real quick. The personal experience one. Personal experience, even your personal experience, you should be able to acknowledge that it's not enough to get to God, rationally at least. Because think about it. If you say, well, God really spoke to me, or God revealed himself to me, or some personal experience with God, or I experienced God, right? Other people say the same thing about their religion. Now, hold on. You could say, well, I experienced it, so therefore it has to be true. They experienced it, and they truly believe that that's what they experienced. So if personal experience, even yours, gives it truth value, then every religion is true. Now, I think that the best explanation for this, unfortunately, rather a pessimistic conclusion, is that it's a psychological phenomenon and one that is typically not that crazy. Religious experiences and especially church ones are very well documented psychological effects that happen on people. Now you could say, well, those effects are from God, but if they're from God, then they occur to other gods, not the one that you believe in. So personal experience is not a valid indicator, even if you were the one that experienced it. There's plenty of now atheists or agnostics that have personal experiences with God in the past, but they started critically thinking and they said, well, other people have it too. Anyways, that's it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed.